Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister and assistant professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio.
I wonder if many people don't find nature to be a real help in the mystical experience. I think that, this whole idea of going camping more these days and people liking to get away from the city and out and commune with nature for a while, I wonder if that isn't part of this search for a deeper kind of experience. And I notice in giving priest retreats, there were times when I asked the question about, what was the prime religious experience that you've ever had? And I've noticed that quite a high number would mention some way in which they were involved in nature.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is Sister Eileen Simon, a religion teacher at St. Ursula Academy. Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of mysticism, ways and methods. Here's Father Bacik.
Eileen, on other occasions we've had the opportunity to talk seriously about spiritual matters, growth in the spiritual life, so I would like to take up that kind of topic again. I'd like to direct it especially to the notion of mysticism. The word mysticism is not really a familiar one to most people, but it does represent to us an important aspect of religious experience. The mystic is not one who necessarily hears voices or visions, but the mystic is one who has a great sense of the oneness of the whole of reality. Mystic feels unified with other people, with nature, and with the power that's running this world. The mystic often has trouble talking about that, expressing it. It is, as we called it, an ineffable experience. It defies clear description because it's so great and marvelous. The mystics tell us that these strong experiences usually only last for a brief period of time, but they stay with them. They transform their life. They are different kinds of people as a result. They're more open to the truth and goodness and beauty all around them. They deal better with people and so on. Their lives are really changed because of this mystical kind of experience. They also say that they understand more about life because they have gone through it. So when we're talking about mysticism, we are talking about a really strong experience that a few great people in history have had and talked to us about. But we're also talking about the kind of experience that maybe many of us know to a lesser degree. Abraham Maslow described in his book Psychology of Being what he called peak experiences. Now, peak experiences are very similar to the mystical experience in some ways. They involve a sense of peacefulness. One feels a sense of harmony, and there is often this sense of oneness. So I think when we begin to describe those experiences, perhaps somewhat poetically, or read the accounts of other people, we're able to say, oh yeah, I know what they're talking about, or I had a minor experience, something like that. So I think that it's important for us to realize that this talk of mysticism really isn't just far out, but it could really be of concern to the rest of us. The mystics could help us understand important things about life and help us to break down some of the barriers that often separate us from ourselves and other people and from our God.
I think that's a good point, Jim. Just the word itself, mystical experience, or the experience of mysticism, it connotes a sense where people have an understanding that it's only for a select few. And I think, as you pointed out about Abraham Maslow, and speaking of peak experiences, that perhaps some of us have had moments when we could say, yes, I felt a sense of togetherness. I felt a sense of oneness with another. I felt a sense of oneness with nature. And perhaps the experience is more common than what we've given ourselves credit for.
That could be. And I think we probably should say right off the bat in talking about mysticism, I have to admit that I would certainly not consider myself to be a mystic in the sense of these people like Teresa of Avila, or John of the Cross, or Thomas Merton in the 20th century, or Teilhard de Chardin, the mystics who have written about it. In one way, I stand as a clear outsider to that experience. But as you just said, I suppose I could find moments in my life when I have felt closer to God than others, or have felt a real kinship with other people. How about yourself, Eileen? Do you want to comment at all about your own experiences that way?
Well, I would say that there has been twice in my life that I have felt a sense of a moment when I really felt a oneness with nature. One time I can remember, it's been just about 12 years now ago, of being at the monastery down near Tiffin and spending the day out in the backyard, and before me were cornfields and trees and pear trees and grapevines and many things, and it was a day of just being still, a day of being with myself, a day of reflecting over my human relationships. And towards the end of the day, I just felt filled with a great sense of inner peace, a sense of a great deal of gratitude. And I felt a oneness with all the creation that was before me, and there was a sense of just picking up my pen and writing in my journal a poem. And I can't say that I do that very often.
But that was a powerful experience.
Yes, it was.
You, yeah.
It's something that I have never forgot. It's something that has come back to me often in my memory and has served as a moment of strength.
You know, I was reminded as you were talking of a quote from Thoreau when he had a similar experience, I think. He says he went to the woods, and he says he doubted whether the near neighborhood of man was not essential to a serene and healthy life. In other words, he wondered if he could really be happy apart from human beings. He says, to be alone was somewhat unpleasant. But in the midst of a gentle rain, while these thoughts prevailed, I was suddenly sensible of such sweet and beneficent society in nature, in the very pattering of the drops, and in every sight and sound around my house, and infinite and unaccountable friendliness all at once, like an atmosphere sustaining me, as made the fancied advantages of human neighborhood insignificant, and I have never thought of them since. Every little pine needle expanded and swelled with sympathy and befriended me. I was so distinctly made aware of the presence of something kindred to me that I thought no place could ever be strange to me again. I suppose you would have a real feeling for that statement of Thoreau after your own experience. I wonder if many people don't find nature to be a real help in the mystical experience. I think that, this whole idea of going camping more these days, and people liking to get away from the city and out and commune with nature for a while, I wonder if that isn't part of this search for a deeper kind of experience. And I notice in giving priest retreats, there were times when I asked the question about, what was the prime religious experience that you've ever had? And I've noticed that quite a high number would mention some way in which they were involved in nature.
I think there's a lot of truth to that, Jim. Just not too long ago, I had the opportunity to spend some time by the ocean, and I was going down to sit on the rocks, and I noticed several cars that had pulled up along this one particular area, and there was a man who was dressed like a business person, and he asked me, after sitting for a while on this particular rock, what did I see in looking at that water. And I said, well, I was just allowing myself to be there. And he said, this is a way for me every day to become still inside so I could be more present at my business. He was a lawyer, and he said for him, every day in his lunch hour, he drove to this particular area to spend 10 minutes just so he could be more effective. So I think there is something to be said of people, all different ages, of being around nature, being with nature, that they might be more one with themselves than others.
I was thinking of Abraham Maslow again. Later in his life, he talked more about what he called the plateau experience. experience, not the peak experience that was such a terrific high, but more of a sense of integration that was longer lasting. And he said that periodically, or maybe it was once a year, I don't really remember, he would go to the ocean, as you described. He had a certain spot near the ocean where he would go to get rejuvenated and find this sense of peace again within himself, and that would sustain him then for the months ahead. So it's another example of this oneness with nature. So perhaps that, especially in our modern technological world, many of us living in urban areas, perhaps we get out of touch with nature, and perhaps the very contact with nature again can give us this sense. I have at Bowling Green State University a certain walkway with trees around it that I like to go to late at night and just sort of stand there and look up at the sky and through the trees. And somehow that, at times at least, is a good help to me to get in a more prayerful state. And sometimes I'm able to feel more of the immensity of God. I won't say that that produces a mystical type experience, but it often does make me a little more prayerful. And so, at least in little ways, I guess I would know something of what you're talking about as nature being a real help. Although the ocean, now there's a great symbol, isn't it? The ocean really symbolizes the infinite in a way. It's and its power and so on. I think that is really a helpful thing for getting into a prayerful state, which may well lead to this mystical type experience where we end up feeling one with the whole of reality. Maybe we should talk about some other means. People often can't get to the ocean regularly or even commune with nature. How are we going to go about trying to move ourselves more towards this mystical type experience? I think, first of all, the great saints have reminded us that a big part of it is discipline, that is mortification, giving up things. They've often said that if you're just gratifying your senses all the time, eating all you want or looking at everything you want to look at, that one can't get into the proper spiritual state then. One is sort of caught up in the things of the flesh and the things of the world. And that if one is going to move to these higher realms of religious experience towards mystical experience, that one has to do some purgation of the senses. One has to fast, for example. Fasting, I think, has often been one of the means used to increase mental alertness. I know a friend of mine who told me, a priest friend who told me not long ago that he started to fast, I think he said one day a week or something like that, and that he found that rather than it being real uncomfortable and messing him up or giving him a headache or something, that he found out that he felt clearer in his thinking on those days. He felt like he was perceiving things more clearly. I found that to be interesting as an example of this purifying of the senses so that maybe we begin to perceive the deeper, the hidden truth of this unity of the world that we're talking about. What other disciplines might one keep this way? Thinking of maybe doing regular spiritual reading.
I think reading is certainly a way to draw one into a sense of a prayerful reality. It's a way of awakening in us a hunger for the mystery. I think the Eastern tradition has suggested to us some ways. The Zen is certainly a way, meaning to sit, to meditate. Posture being a very important reality in the Eastern tradition, a sense of your breathing and controlling that breathing, bringing a sense of calmness to oneself. The whole reality of controlling your thought process, that kind of like, I use the image of a windshield wiper. When one is driving a car, focusing on the driving, you don't get involved in the drops of water that are hitting on your windshield. And kind of in the same way, in putting ourselves in the presence and opening ourselves up to being more attentive to the incomprehensible mystery, that we allow what comes up to come up, but not to get involved with it. that's a form of discipline that disposes us to, I think, prayer.
Mm-hmm. That would bring up further conversation, wouldn't it, on the whole notion of meditation and all of the techniques used to try to get us in closer touch with the God who is in rule in our lives. So maybe we should talk a little bit more about meditation as a prime technique of going about this. Now, in the East, where the Buddhists have we talk about Zen Buddhism, which means a sitting, right? That refers to the posture, zazen.
Yeah.
And that they're very intent on doing that for long hours in the day. I've seen those movies where a guy will come up behind them with a big stick and hit the monks in the back to make sure, and if they hit them quite strongly in the back, and if they're in the right posture, that really doesn't bother them. Then they're so rooted and so properly positioned that this strong blow in their back they hardly feel. But those who are out of line in some way and don't have the proper posture evidently are sort of straightened out in that way or called to attention. So the monks would be involved in a really strenuous effort, wouldn't they, to achieve this meditation? What are some of the other things they do? Of course, I know in Hinduism more there is the mantra meditation, the transcendental meditation, as it's become known in the United States, which is largely a matter of breathing, being very conscious of the breath coming in as one, and then as the breath is let out, one says the mantra, or the phrase that one has been taught. And that is, again, a method of concentrating one's attention. Yeah. I think the physiologists tell us what happens is that the saying of the one phrase every time you let your breath out really sort of blocks off the left brain or rational, logical type thinking, and therefore releases some of the right brain activity, which is the more creative side of us. I think that's the theory that's involved physiologically. But I do that type of meditation myself, the mantra meditation, and I find it to be very effective. I learned it not from transcendental meditation or the Eastern traditions, but really out of our Western tradition. I can remember reading J.D. Salinger's book, Franny and Zooey, where they talked about the Jesus prayer. And that was the idea of the Christian monks. They would say the name of Jesus over and over, or that longer phrase, which I never remember. Do you remember it? How it goes? Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, for I am a sinner, I think. It's something like that they would just say over and over, so it would become part of their very breathing. But I think the technique really amounts to the same thing. It's concentrating on one particular saying, and in doing so, blocking out many of the other usual thoughts that are in our mind, and getting more in touch with our pre-conscious or unconscious or our right brain activities.
Yoga, too, I think, is another method. Yoga being a sense of getting in touch with one's whole body and can lead to a sense of enlightenment, can lead to a sense of inner freedom, the same as any of these other particular methods that we've spoken.
Have you done that, the yoga type exercises?
No, I haven't.
No, I know some of the people studying out at the University of San Francisco this summer were involved in that and found it to be very effective, and I've known other people that way who find it very relaxing and so on. So we've got postures, we've got breathing involved in this, we've got the disciplines that are needed, the fasting type things, all trying to some way or another get us in touch with the reality of the world, getting us out of the usual way of thinking of things. I think even the stories that are told in the various religious traditions have this power. That's one of the reasons that the Buddhists had koans, for example, the most famous one being, what's the sound of one hand clapping? And as you thought about that or meditated on that, that was designed to cut through your ordinary ways of thinking and force you to see reality in a different way. It's not unlike what the parables of Jesus were designed to do. So that Jesus tells these striking stories about people who went out early in the morning and worked all day and got the same wage as those people who worked only 1 hour. And that shakes up our ordinary ways of perceiving things. That's not the way the world ought to run, we say to ourselves. That's not the common average way of thinking. So that when we hear those kind of biblical stories, they again shake up our ways of perceiving the world and suggest to us there is this deeper kind of thing. I guess we need to be cautious, though, don't we, Eileen, about these methods. Methods are always means to an end, right?
Yes. I think it's a very good point, Jim, of saying that methods are always a means to a particular end. And I think for the Christian, when we begin to talk about meditation, that we really need to keep in mind that the experience of mysticism, the experience of enlightenment, the experience of contemplation, the experience of prayer, that it all leads to the experience of being loved by God, being loved by the gracious mystery. And as St. John says, it is his invitation, it is his initiative first, that I'm able to love and respond because God has first loved me.
Now, I think that there's been a debate always throughout history of spirituality about whether you could cause these states or not, whether you could make yourself into a mystic or not, whether contemplation, as you said it, this real deep experience of union with God, of just resting in his presence, whether that's a gift or whether it can be earned or reached somehow. And I think that the point you made, I think, is the valuable one, that it really has to be seen as a gift of God's love, and something that calls us out of ourselves. I think ultimately we really cannot say as Christians that we can earn this, or that we've got a mystical experience coming, or if we just meditate long enough every day it's going to happen, or we're going to get this high all the time, or we're going to induce a peak experience. It seems better to relax a little bit more with it, and to live the kind of spiritual life we think is healthy, have a proper amount of asceticism, of mortification, of giving up things like fasting, so on, and also to do the prayer, the scripture reading, or the spiritual reading, the meditation, and sort of let happen what will happen, rather than trying to force it. And if good, strong, intense, warm experiences happen, then maybe the right response is to say, well, thank you, and to be grateful for this deeper experience. Now, this raises in my mind the question of drugs. You know, throughout history, again, people have often used drugs to get to these heightened states of consciousness. And with people like Timothy O'Leary and the drug culture of the 60s, a lot of talk was along that line, that people were going to use drugs to induce mystical experience. I think Huxley had been one who had experimented with that. In other words, some very good people had done experimentation with drugs to see if they couldn't produce in themselves this mystical type experience of unity with everything. And I know that I talk to young people who really did try to do that. And I must say I was always really very leery of that. I never trusted that. It always seemed like a quick, easy way of accomplishing something that really was a gift in life. And that the use of drugs to try to induce mystical experience, or to get cosmic consciousness, as some of them said, or to get this deeper awareness, always seemed to me to be sort of a cop-out. But I realize that some people are more positive on that and claim that indeed it did expand their ways of seeing the world and so on. But I would be much more leery of that.
I wouldn't doubt that at that given moment in the experience of the drug, that perhaps that was their experience. But I guess I would question, when one wasn't taking the drugs or that, what was the human experience then? And I think the gift that the mystics witness to us is that your formal prayer, if one could say, doesn't stop here and life is over here, but it all becomes one, that your way of life is your prayer, and your prayer is your way of life. And so I would question the whole experience of drugs as a quick way to get the sense of enlightenment or cosmic consciousness, as you said, some young people described to you, as what takes place when that drug isn't induced within one's system.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's the great problem then. I mean, you're either going to get into a situation where you're going to have to keep using it to get a high all the time or to induce the peak experience, or one's going to have to live in the real world and go along with its routine and dullness and live in the doldrums and so on. So I really question that myself. And,
the whole reality, I think, of authenticity.
So the idea is that the mystic is really trying to get in touch with reality and to allow God to do that, to allow God to accomplish that in himself or in herself. So we have here this whole idea of trying to figure out how we could improve ourselves in the spiritual life. I guess what the mystics suggest to us is a path to follow. Not that we're going to get as far as they got, but that maybe it suggests to us things that just could be good for us in our ordinary life. So that maybe for many of us, we really should try to get more in touch with nature. Maybe find a few minutes. I like your story very much about the lawyer just going out to the ocean and coming there to recreate himself, I guess on a daily basis, huh?
Yes. He said 10 minutes of his lunch hour every single day.
That's that's impressive, and I wonder if more people could find a few minutes to walk in the sunshine, or stroll in the snow, or to look at a tree, or to appreciate a sunset. Maybe we would indeed enrich ourselves in some way. And then we got into the areas of discipline and how we're going to keep our senses in some sort of check, so that we're not always wanting more things, so we're not just caught up in the things of this world. Now, I think there's a danger in that. I don't want to get to the thing of saying, well, the world is bad, or that pleasure is going to take us away from God. I really don't think that's true, and I sometimes think the mystics are a little bit off on that. But they do remind us of the other side of it, that too much pleasure-seeking could get in the way of really becoming a deep and authentic person. And then we have the whole idea of the meditation, which I think is so important. I think all of us would benefit if we could find 10 quiet minutes in the day to do some kind of meditation, maybe in an imaginative working out of a biblical scene, maybe meditating on a scripture passage, perhaps doing the breathing type meditation that we talked about. But I think one of the most important points made here was the one that you said, that all of this is for the purpose of the love of God. That's what the mysticism is all about. These exercises are done to come closer to God, to appreciate his love, and to learn to try to share some of his love with our world.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister and assistant professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was Sister Eileen Simon, a religion teacher at St. Ursula Academy. The topic of this week's reflection was mysticism, ways and methods. If you have any questions about today's program or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio, 43623. Produced in the studio.